Before nations were born, before prophets were crowned, there was a boy in the desert, weeping beneath a dying sun. A mother's tears fell upon the sand, and heaven answered with water and with destiny. Who was Ishmael, the son cast out, yet remembered by God? Why did the divine promise begin in his father's tent, but awaken in the wilderness? And how could the lineage of a servant woman give rise to the faith of more than 2 billion souls today? This is not just a story of exile. It's the story of divine intention disguised as rejection. The world called him abandoned. God called him chosen. From the cry at the well of Zamzam to the rebuilding of the Kaaba, from the silence of the wilderness to the voice that echoed, "Recite, in the name of your Lord who created." The bloodline of Ishmael would become the bridge between Abraham's faith and Islam's revelation. Prepare to uncover what history almost buried. The true story of the firstborn son, the archer of the desert, the child whose survival changed eternity. This is the untold legacy of Ishmael, the forgotten son of promise. If you're ready to uncover the hidden truth behind the son the world tried to forget, stay till the very end. What you're about to hear will challenge history, reveal prophecy, and connect the past to your present in ways you've never imagined. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications, because this is just the beginning of a journey through the lost legacies of the Bible. The desert wind whispered across the tents of Mamre as twilight bled into gold and purple. Abraham, now an old man with silvered beard and sun-worn skin, stood outside his dwelling, his eyes tracing the stars above him. Every one of those stars, God had said, would represent a descendant. Yet decades had passed, and still, Sarah's womb remained barren. Inside, Sarah sat beside the faint glow of an oil lamp, her hands trembling over a woven cloth. Once filled with laughter, her face now bore the quiet ache of waiting too long for a miracle. She looked at Abraham, noble, faithful, patient, and her heart broke at his stillness. She loved him, but she could no longer bear the silence of unfulfilled promises. That night, as the flames flickered low, she spoke words that would change history. "Take my maidservant Hagar. Perhaps through her, the promise will live." Her voice quivered, part resignation, part hope. Abraham hesitated, torn between divine faith and human weariness. The Lord had spoken of descendants, but not how they would come. At last, he bowed his head in sorrowful consent. And so, under the ancient stars, destiny shifted. The seed of nations was about to be sown, not through the woman of promise, but through the servant of Egypt. Hagar was young, perhaps in her early 20s, with dark olive skin and eyes like polished onyx. Once a servant in Pharaoh's court, she carried herself with grace, though her heart was weary of servitude. When Sarah called her, she obeyed, yet a strange unease filled her chest. The night Abraham entered her tent, the desert grew still. There were no songs, no celebration. Only the sound of the wind outside and two destinies intertwining in silence. Days turned into weeks, and soon Hagar felt life stirring within her. She would cradle her belly and whisper, "You are the son of promise," even if they do not see it. But joy turned quickly to tension. Sarah watched her with eyes clouded by jealousy. The woman who once offered her servant now found herself tormented by her own decision. Hagar, sensing this change, began to carry herself with pride. She was no longer just a servant. She was the mother of Abraham's child. The household became a storm. Words sharpened, glances burned. Until one day, Hagar fled into the wilderness, unable to bear the weight of Sarah's wrath. The wilderness was cruel. Endless sand and searing light. Hagar wandered until her strength failed her, collapsing near a spring of water on the road to Shur. Her lips were cracked, her eyes heavy with despair. And then the wind stilled. A voice broke through the silence, gentle yet commanding. "Hagar, servant of Sarah, where have you come from, and where are you going?" Startled, she lifted her gaze. Before her stood a radiant being, a figure of light clothed in desert brilliance. His eyes held the calm of eternity. "I am fleeing from my mistress," she whispered. The angel's voice resonated through the air. "Return to her and submit, for the Lord has heard your misery. You will bear a son, and you shall call his name Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your affliction." He paused, his expression both solemn and wondrous. "He shall be like a wild donkey among men, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. Yet he shall dwell in the presence of all his brothers." Tears filled Hagar's eyes. The desert had become her grave, but now it turned into her sanctuary. She fell to her knees and cried, "Have I truly seen the one who sees me?" And from that day, the well was named Bir Lahai Roi, the well of the living one who sees me. Months later, under the rising sun, the cry of a newborn pierced the air. Abraham held the child in his arms, his heart trembling with both joy and awe. Hagar watched from her mat, weary yet radiant. Sarah stood at a distance, her eyes unreadable. Abraham raised the infant toward the sky and proclaimed, "His name shall be Ishmael, for the Lord has heard." The camp rejoiced. Drums sounded, servants sang. Yet within the laughter lay a shadow. Sarah's smile was fragile. Her heart battled the fear that she had been replaced. As Ishmael grew, Abraham loved him deeply. The boy had his father's eyes and his mother's fire. Curious, bold, untamed. He would run barefoot through the dunes, chasing the wind as though destiny itself played beside him. But each time Abraham watched him, he felt a quiet tremor, the whisper of a divine mystery. Could this boy truly be the child of the promise? Or was there another yet to come? Years passed. Ishmael grew strong, and the desert began to echo his laughter. But the silence of Sarah's tent lingered. One evening, as the stars shimmered above, God appeared to Abraham once more. "I will make you exceedingly fruitful. Kings shall come from you. Your wife Sarah shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac." Abraham fell on his face, torn between wonder and confusion. "May Ishmael live before you," he pleaded. And the Lord replied, "As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him. I will make him fruitful and multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac." That night, Abraham's tears fell upon the sand. Joy and pain mingled like water and salt. He looked at the sleeping boy inside the tent, unaware of the divine division that had already been written in the heavens. 2 promises, 2 destinies, one through covenant, one through calling. And the story of nations had just begun. The sun rose over the hills of Hebron, painting the tents of Abraham's camp in amber light. The morning air was thick with tension. Inside the great tent, laughter echoed faintly, the laughter of a child. Ishmael, now a boy of 10, chased a lamb around the courtyard, his wild hair flying, his laughter like wind against stone. From a distance Sarah watched. Her eyes softened for a moment, then hardened again. She saw not a boy, but a reminder, a living symbol of her mistake, born from her desperation. The boy who was not hers. Abraham entered, his steps slow, his face lined with both love and burden. He placed his hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Peace, my wife," he said gently. Her gaze never left Hagar's tent. "There is no peace while she is here." Abraham sighed. "God has blessed us through this child. He is flesh of my flesh." Sarah turned sharply. "He is her son, not mine." Their silence stretched like a wound that refused to close. Abraham looked toward the boy again, innocent, unaware of the invisible storm about to sweep his world. And in that silence, the seed of separation began to grow. That night, as the camp slept, Hagar dreamt. The desert wind moaned outside her tent, and the moon cast a silver glow over her sleeping son. In her dream, She stood again by a familiar spring, Bir Lahai, the well of the living one who saw her. The same angel appeared before her, glowing with celestial fire. "Hagar," he said, "your son is chosen. Through him, a great people will rise, fierce, free, and unbroken." She trembled. But what of Sarah? What of her son yet unborn? The angel's voice became as the sound of rushing water. "Do not fear what men divide. God watches over all who are his. Ishmael shall walk the path of the wilderness, and his descendants shall fill the earth like the grains of sand beneath your feet." When Hagar awoke, her eyes were wet with tears. The prophecy still echoed in her soul. She turned to Ishmael sleeping beside her and whispered, "You are not forgotten, my son. You are seen." The dawn came golden and calm, but the peace it promised would not last. It happened just as the Lord had said. In the season of promise, Sarah conceived and bore a son. His name was Isaac. The camp erupted in joy. Music, laughter, shouts of praise. Even Abraham's aged face glowed with wonder. For the first time in her life, Sarah held a child of her own. But with every cry of Isaac, every smile from Abraham, Hagar felt the air grow colder around her. Ishmael, now a teenager, watched from a distance, torn between love for his father and the sting of being replaced. One afternoon, during a feast to celebrate Isaac's weaning, Ishmael's laughter rang through the camp as he played with the baby. But Sarah, seeing them together, mistook his laughter for mockery. Her face darkened. She turned to Abraham and said, "Cast out this slave woman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." Abraham's heart broke. The night was long and sleepless. He loved Ishmael, his firstborn, his joy, his strength. But God spoke to him, "Do not be distressed because of the boy or your servant. In Isaac shall your seed be called. Yet I will make a nation of the son of the bondwoman also, because he is your offspring." Before dawn, Abraham rose, his face heavy with grief. He packed a skin of water and bread and called Hagar. She knew even before he spoke. She clutched her son's hand as they walked into the desert. The same desert where she had once fled in fear, now returning in exile. The wilderness of Beersheba was endless, sand and heat without mercy. The skin of water was soon empty, the bread long gone. Hagar's lips cracked. Her son stumbled beside her. The world shimmered like fire. When Ishmael could walk no more, she laid him under a shrub for shade and stepped away, unable to bear the sight. Her voice broke as she wept. "Let me not see the death of the boy." She lifted her eyes to heaven, silent, aching, empty. Then a sound, a voice like cool water in the burning wind. "Hagar, what troubles you? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is." Her eyes opened wide, and there before her a well, a pool of living water gleaming like a jewel in the sand. She fell to her knees, tears mixing with the dust, and filled the skin again. She ran to Ishmael, lifting his head, pressing the water to his lips. The boy drank, coughed, and opened his eyes. The wind carried the scent of life again. In that sacred moment, heaven declared once more, the child of the wilderness would not die. He would live to father nations. Time passed, and the boy grew into a man. Ishmael's eyes held the fire of the desert, fierce, free, and enduring. His skin bronzed beneath the sun. His arms grew strong from the hunt, and his hands learned the art of the bow. He became a skilled archer, roaming the wild lands of Paran. Fearless, alone, but never forgotten. Hagar watched him from their tent near the palm trees, her heart both proud and heavy. When Ishmael turned 20, she found him a wife from Egypt, a woman of noble bearing and quiet strength. Their union marked the birth of a legacy that would outlive kingdoms. Abraham, now nearing the end of his days, sometimes looked toward the southern horizon where his son dwelled. He would whisper into the wind, May the Lord bless you, my son. May you walk in his light, even when unseen. The desert around Ishmael became his sanctuary, his inheritance, and his destiny. And as the stars spread over the night sky, he would look up and remember the God who heard him, the God who made the wilderness bloom. Years passed after the separation. The tents of Abraham stood far to the north, filled with laughter and the sound of Isaac's youthful voice. But beyond the hills, in the wilderness of Paran, another boy grew into a man, far from the father who once held him. Ishmael, now in his 20s, stood atop a dune, bow in hand, eyes scanning the horizon. The desert had become both his teacher and his test. Every day he fought against thirst, hunger, and loneliness. His body bore the sun's mark, lean, strong, and bronzed. But his heart still carried the echo of the day his father turned away. At night, he would build a fire and sit beneath the endless sky. The stars above him were the same ones his father had counted when God promised him descendants without number. Ishmael would whisper, "Are these stars mine too, Father?" The wind gave no answer. In Hebron, Abraham often looked toward the southern horizon and thought of his firstborn. He never forgot the sound of that boy's laughter, nor the tears of that final morning. Between them stretched miles of desert, and the silence of two destinies moving apart. Hagar watched her son from a distance. Her hair had turned streaks of silver, but her eyes were still fierce and full of faith. She had seen God once, the living one who saw her, and that memory had become her strength. But now she saw that her son was alone. Ishmael was becoming restless. His spirit, wild as the desert wind, sought belonging. So, she took a long journey back toward the border of Egypt, her homeland. There she found a woman from her own people, tall, graceful, with eyes that gleamed like river water under moonlight. Her name was Mahalath, daughter of Pharaoh's kin. She was strong and proud, a woman of sharp wit and gentle spirit. Hagar brought her to Paran, where Ishmael met her beneath the acacia trees. Their eyes met, and something ancient stirred between them, the understanding of two souls forged by survival. They were married in the wilderness, beneath the same sky that had once witnessed Hagar's despair. There were no golden halls or feasts, only the sound of wind and the scent of desert flowers. But in that humble union, God began to weave the thread of a nation, one that would outlive empires. Mahalath bore Ishmael sons and daughters, and their tents multiplied. Hunters, riders, herdsmen, they began to form tribes that would spread across the vast lands east of Egypt and south toward Arabia. From exile, a people was rising. One morning, the horizon shimmered with the heat of the desert. Ishmael stood outside his tent, sharpening his arrows, when a caravan appeared, slow, dignified, moving like a mirage. At its head was an old man with a long silver beard, wearing a white robe that gleamed under the sun. Ishmael froze. He knew that face. "Father," he whispered. Abraham dismounted slowly. Time had bent his back, but not his spirit. The years between them vanished in that moment. They stood in silence before one another, two men bound by blood and by prophecy. Abraham reached out and placed his trembling hand on Ishmael's shoulder. "My son," he said softly, "God has kept his word. You are alive and strong." Ishmael's eyes shone with emotion he could barely speak. "You left us, Father. The desert nearly took us." Abraham bowed his head. "I obeyed the voice of the Almighty, but I never stopped praying for you." The two men sat beneath a palm, sharing bread and water, the first meal they had shared in years. Abraham told him of Isaac, of the covenant, of God's promise to make Ishmael's descendants great. Then Abraham said, "The Lord has commanded me to build a house, a sanctuary in the land of Baca. Will you go with me, my son?" Ishmael rose, tears in his eyes. "Always." And so, father and son walked together once more, into the desert, toward destiny. They traveled for weeks until they reached the barren valley of Baca, a place surrounded by mountains and silence. There was no water, no vegetation, only stones and heat. Yet Abraham declared, "This is the place the Lord has chosen." Here, in that desolate land, they built a sanctuary of stone, the Kaaba, the first house dedicated to the worship of the one God. As they raised the walls together, Abraham lifted his hands and prayed, "O Lord, accept this from us. Make this a place of refuge and peace, and raise from among our descendants a messenger who will call to your worship." Ishmael placed the last stone into the foundation, the black stone, and stood beside his father, looking upon the structure. It was simple, yet it carried eternity in its purpose. In that moment, two covenants met, one through Isaac, the line of prophets leading to Israel, and one through Ishmael, the path that would one day lead to Arabia, to Mecca, and to a messenger whose voice would echo through time. When the work was done, Abraham embraced Ishmael, saying, "May peace rest upon you, my son. The desert rejected you, but heaven has remembered you." Years rolled into decades. Abraham passed into eternity, and Ishmael became the patriarch of 12 sons. Princes of tribes that stretched from Havilah to Shur, near Egypt, and all the way to Assyria. Their names were carved into memory: Nebaioth, Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedema. Each became a father of nations, rulers of caravan routes and desert kingdoms. Ishmael grew old, his hair silver, his eyes still bright with desert fire. He would often sit outside his tent at dusk, watching his sons ride across the dunes, strong, swift, free. And he would remember the days of hunger and thirst, of exile and despair. But he would smile, for he knew that every tear had watered a promise. Before his death, Ishmael told his children, "Never forget the God who hears. When you are lost, call upon him as I did, and he will make a well for you too." He passed away at the age of 137 and was buried near his brother Isaac in the cave of Machpelah. Two sons of one father, two paths joined again in the dust. And the voice of the wilderness faded, but not forever. For from Ishmael's bloodline, another voice would one day cry, "Recite, in the name of your Lord who created." The morning broke over Beersheba in a hush of orange and gold. The camp was still, save for the whispering wind that carried with it the sound of parting. Abraham stood outside his tent, a leather skin of water in one hand, a sack of bread in the other. Before him stood Hagar, her face veiled, her eyes glistening beneath the morning sun. Behind her, Ishmael, now a young man of 16, watched silently, jaw tight, his heart beating like thunder. "Take these," Abraham said softly, pressing the provisions into Hagar's hands. His voice trembled, but his resolve did not. Hagar's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. She looked once toward Sarah's tent, silent, shadowed, then back at the man who had once saved her from death. "Must it be this way?" she whispered. Abraham's eyes filled. "God will make of him a great nation. This I swear." Hagar turned away before her tears could betray her. She took Ishmael's hand, and together they began their walk into the wilderness. The sand stretched endlessly before them, vast, glowing, merciless. Every step away from Abraham's camp was a step into destiny. The boy looked back once, and Abraham raised his hand. A silent blessing, a farewell of love and faith. That morning the desert claimed its heirs. The sun climbed high and fierce. Their shadows shortened until they disappeared entirely. The water skin grew lighter, the bread harder. Ishmael tried to stay strong for his mother, but the heat pressed upon him like fire. His lips were cracked. His breath came ragged. "Mother," he murmured, "perhaps there is a well ahead." Hagar smiled weakly, brushing sand from his face. "There will be, my son. The Lord sees." But as the hours passed, hope began to wither. When the last drop of water fell, Hagar's hands shook. She stumbled to her knees beside a lonely tamarisk shrub. Ishmael collapsed beside her. She looked at her son, the promise of God lying silent in the dust, and her heart broke. "I cannot watch him die," she sobbed. She placed him under the shade and stepped away, her body trembling. Her voice rose to heaven, the same voice that once cried beside Bir Lahai years before. "O Lord, will you forget us now?" The desert wind gave no answer. The heat shimmered. The world went still. And then faintly a cry, not Hagar's but Ishmael's. The boy's voice, weak yet echoing through the heavens. And God heard. The air shifted. The silence broke. From behind her came a voice, calm, divine, unearthly. "Hagar, fear not." She turned. Before her stood an angel, radiant as the sun but cool as moonlight. The same figure she had seen years before. "For God has heard the voice of the boy where he is," the angel said. "Rise, lift up the lad, and hold him with your hand, for I will make him a great nation." Hagar blinked as her vision cleared, and there before her, shimmering in the sand, was a well, a spring bursting from nowhere. She fell to her knees, crying and laughing all at once. She filled the skin and ran to her son. She lifted Ishmael's head, pressing the water to his lips. He drank deeply, gasping as life returned to his eyes. The sound of his breathing filled the air like music. They stayed by that well for days, then weeks, and Hagar named it as before, Bir Lahai, the well of the living one who sees me. The desert that once tried to bury them had now become their home. As the years passed, the wilderness became Ishmael's realm. The boy grew into a warrior, tall, broad-shouldered, eyes sharp as the desert hawk. His bow never missed, his feet were swift as sandstorms. One evening, as he stood by the well, a sudden stillness filled the air. He felt something, a whisper not from wind but from heaven. "Rise, son of the wilderness," the voice said within him. "For your descendants shall cover the earth like the sands of this desert. Kings shall ride from your line, nations shall bear your name." Ishmael dropped to his knees, trembling. "Who are you?" The voice replied, "I am the one who heard you in your affliction. I am the God of your father, Abraham." Tears ran down Ishmael's face as he lifted his hands to the sky. "Then I am not forgotten?" "No," came the whisper. "You are chosen for a purpose unseen. Through your blood, my word will rise again." That night Ishmael stood under the stars, the same stars his father once counted, and knew at last that he was not cast out, but set apart. The desert had not broken him. It had forged him. Hagar grew old and frail, her days quiet beneath the palms near Bir Lahai. She often sat watching her son as he trained his young warriors, men who bore his strength and courage. The tents around them had multiplied. The promise had begun to take form. One night Ishmael knelt beside her. "Mother," he said softly, "you once said that God sees. I have seen too. The desert listens, and the heavens remember." Hagar smiled faintly. "Then the promise lives on. Never forget the well, my son. Every generation must remember the God who hears." She closed her eyes that night beneath the desert stars and passed peacefully, the servant girl who had seen angels, the mother who raised a nation. Ishmael buried her near the well that saved them both. He stood there long after, alone, the night wind whispering through the dunes. "Mother," he said quietly, "you called me the son of promise. I will not fail it." He lifted his bow high toward the sky, the weapon of his survival, the symbol of his freedom, and turned his face southward. Before him stretched the lands that would one day become Arabia, his inheritance. And as dawn broke, the light shimmered upon the sands like 1,000 stars, a reflection of the covenant that no man could erase. For though Ishmael had been cast out of one household, He had been adopted by heaven itself. The years after Hagar's passing were silent but sacred. Ishmael, now in his middle age, roamed the vast lands between Paran and Egypt. His hair, once jet black, had begun to show threads of silver. His eyes, still sharp as falcons, carried the wisdom of a man who had seen both exile and favor. The desert was no longer his punishment. It was his kingdom. He rode across it with his bow slung across his shoulder, leading caravans through the ancient trade routes that connected Egypt, Arabia, and Canaan. Nomads and traders alike whispered his name in reverence. Ishmael, son of Abraham, the archer of the south. At dusk, he often sat alone on the dunes, gazing at the horizon as wind shaped the sands into waves. Every sound of the wilderness, the sighing breeze, the crackle of fire, felt alive, as though the desert itself spoke in a tongue only he could hear. One night, under the great vault of stars, he murmured, "O God of my father, you who heard me when I was but a child dying in thirst, still speak, even if by silence." And the desert answered not with thunder, but with peace, the peace of purpose. From Ishmael's blood, 12 sons were born, each fierce, loyal, and proud. Their names became banners across the wilderness: Nebaioth, Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedema. Each son led a tribe that spread like rivers branching from one great source. Together, they became the 12 princes of the desert, traders of spices, masters of bows, guardians of the caravan routes that carried gold, myrrh, and incense to the nations. Their tents rose across the sands like constellations brought down to earth. Camels moved in long processions, drums echoed through the dunes, and the air was heavy with the scent of frankincense and cedarwood. They lived not behind walls but beneath the sky. No king ruled over them, for freedom was their inheritance. But Ishmael taught them one law: honor the God of our father Abraham. He is one. He sees, he hears, he sustains. In every tribe, an altar of stones stood, rough and simple, facing the rising sun, where morning prayers were whispered to the unseen creator of all. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, a small caravan appeared in the distance. Ishmael's eldest son, Nebaioth, raised his hand, signaling for caution. But Ishmael himself stepped forward, recognizing the familiar stride of the old traveler. It was Isaac. The two brothers, once divided by the jealousy of mothers and the will of God, met again after decades. Their faces, weathered and lined, reflected the same father's grace. Isaac smiled. "Brother of the wilderness." Ishmael laughed, a deep, thunderous sound. "Brother of the promise." They embraced, two halves of a legacy reunited. That night, under the stars, they spoke long about Abraham, his faith, his journey, and his covenant. Isaac told him of Canaan and the line that would continue through Jacob. Ishmael shared stories of the desert tribes, the wells that never ran dry, and the whispers of God that rode on the wind. Before they parted, Isaac placed his hand upon Ishmael's chest. "Our father's God bless you, Ishmael. Your people will never be erased." And Ishmael replied, "Nor yours, brother. Our names will stand until the end of the ages, written by the same hand." When Isaac's caravan vanished into the sands, Ishmael felt peace. The old bitterness was gone. The wilderness no longer echoed with loneliness, only legacy. That night Ishmael dreamed. He stood again at the well where his mother once wept. The same angel appeared, radiant, vast, timeless. "Son of Abraham," the angel said, "the promise continues. From your seed will rise men of valor and kings of nations. But in the distant centuries, one shall arise who will call the people back to the worship of the one, the God of your father, the God who hears." Ishmael bowed low, trembling. "Will he come through my sons?" The angel smiled. Yes, through the line of Kedar, your son. The voice that will echo through the mountains and deserts. It shall come from your house. Ishmael raised his hands, weeping. Then even the exile was part of the plan. When he awoke, dawn was breaking. The air was cool, the world quiet. He stepped outside his tent and looked toward the eastern mountains. The desert wind brushed against him like a whisper of eternity. He smiled faintly. "So be it," he murmured. "Let the one who hears be praised." In the years that followed, Ishmael's people grew numerous and strong. Their language became the song of the sand, the root of what would one day be known as Arabic. Their customs spread across the lands. The honor of guests, the love of family, the worship of one unseen God. Long before cities rose and empires fell, Ishmael's tribes built their lives upon faith and endurance. They did not carve idols, for the story of Hagar and the God who appeared by the well lived in their blood. When Ishmael felt his end near, he called his sons together beneath the palms of Paran. His voice, though aged, carried power. "My sons," he said, "remember, our father walked with the Almighty, and through him we were blessed. Never let your hearts forget the one who hears in the wilderness. The world may call you wanderers, but heaven calls you chosen." He looked toward the horizon, the direction of Mecca, where the Kaaba stood as the house of his father's worship. "Guard that house," he said softly. "For one day, the voice that was promised will call from among your children, and all nations will hear." When he finished, the desert grew still, as though creation itself was listening. Ishmael lay back upon his mat, the glow of sunset bathing his face. His final breath was calm, his final word a whisper of gratitude. El Roy, the God who sees. The wind carried his name across the dunes, through the ages, a sound that would echo in the call to prayer, centuries later. The sun was low when the old man appeared on the horizon, walking slowly but with purpose. The desert wind tugged at his white robe as he leaned on a staff polished smooth by years of pilgrimage. Ishmael looked up from the palm grove where he trained his sons in archery, and his heart stirred. It was Abraham. Time had carved deep lines into the patriarch's face, yet his eyes burned with the same unyielding light. Ishmael ran to meet him, bowing low. The two men embraced, father and son reunited not by sorrow, but by purpose. Abraham smiled. "My son, the Lord has called me again to build something eternal, a house of remembrance for all who will call upon his name." "The Lord?" Ishmael asked, his voice trembling with reverence. "Yes," Abraham replied. "He has shown me a valley between two mountains, barren, silent, yet chosen. You must come with me. The promise that began with your birth must now take form in stone." Ishmael felt the weight of destiny in his chest. "Then let us go, Father. The desert is ready to serve its maker." That night, under a sky of 1,000 stars, father and son walked together again. Two servants, one promise, one God. After weeks of travel, they arrived at a valley surrounded by mountains, parched, lifeless, and hauntingly still. Yet Abraham's spirit quickened. He stood in the center and lifted his hands to heaven. "This is the place," he said, "the heart of the earth, where nations will one day gather to remember the Creator." Ishmael surveyed the empty expanse. There is no water, no tree, no life. Yet here, Abraham said with a smile, life will begin again. They pitched their tent near the ruins of an ancient foundation, stones long buried by time. Ishmael touched one, feeling a faint warmth beneath the surface. "These are not ordinary stones," he whispered. Abraham nodded. "They mark the first altar built by Adam himself, the earliest remembrance of the one who made all things. Now we shall raise it anew." And so, in the valley of Baca, father and son began to rebuild what heaven had ordained, a sanctuary that would outlast empires. From dawn to dusk they labored. Ishmael lifted stones as Abraham set them into place. Sweat mingled with prayer. For every stone laid, Abraham would whisper, "In the name of the Most High." Days turned into weeks, until the walls began to rise. The structure took the shape of a perfect cube, simple, majestic, eternal. When the final stone was set, Abraham turned to his son. "Bring the black stone from the ground where the light touches." Ishmael found it, smooth, dark, unlike any stone of the earth, and placed it in his father's hands. Together, they fitted it into the eastern corner of the structure. Then, both men raised their hands and prayed aloud, their voices echoing across the empty valley. "Our Lord, accept this from us. Indeed, you are the all-hearing, the all-seeing. Make this a sanctuary of peace, and from our descendants raise a messenger, who will call to your worship and purify your people." When they finished, silence fell, a silence alive with divine presence. The air shimmered faintly, as though unseen beings gathered to witness the covenant renewed. Abraham looked upon the house, now known as the Kaaba, and tears filled his eyes. "It is finished," he whispered. And so the promise continues. That evening, by the glow of a small fire, Ishmael gazed into the flames. The memory of another day long ago flickered in his mind. The day his father told him of a vision, a command, a sacrifice. He had been but a boy then, yet he remembered the steadiness in Abraham's eyes. "My son," his father had said, "I saw in a dream that I must offer you." And Ishmael had answered, "Father, do as you are commanded. You will find me patient." Though the blade never fell, though the ram had been provided, that moment had bound father and son in a trust deeper than blood. Now, as he sat by the fire, Ishmael understood. That test was not about death, but destiny. "Father," Ishmael said quietly, "you once lifted the knife in obedience. Today we lift stone in remembrance. In both the covenant stands." Abraham smiled faintly. "And you, my son, were both the sacrifice and the sign. The world will remember that obedience longer than kingdoms remember their kings." The fire crackled softly between them, a sacred echo of faith reborn. When the Kaaba stood complete, Abraham and Ishmael circled it in reverence. 7 times, barefoot upon the sand. Around them, the valley glowed with an unseen light. Abraham raised his hands once more. "O Lord, make this place a refuge of peace for all who seek you. Let the hearts of men be drawn here as rivers to the sea." A soft wind rose, carrying their prayer to the mountains. Then Abraham turned to Ishmael. "Guard this place, my son. Teach your people purity, hospitality, and the worship of the One. From your children shall rise a voice, a messenger who will restore what mankind will forget." Ishmael bowed deeply. "By the God who heard me in the wilderness, I swear to guard this covenant until my last breath." Abraham placed his hand upon Ishmael's head. Then the promise is sealed. As dawn broke, the golden light bathed the Kaaba, and the two men, prophet and son, exile and heir, stood side by side, watching the first pilgrims of creation. Birds circling above as though joining their worship. From that moment the house of God became eternal, and through Ishmael's descendants, the light would travel, hidden through the centuries, carried by kings, shepherds, and wanderers, until it would find its voice once more in the deserts of Arabia. A voice that would cry, "There is no God but God." Centuries had passed since Ishmael's death. His tribes spread across the deserts, their tents multiplying like stars, their language flowing like wind over the dunes. The sons of Ishmael had become a nation, merchants, poets, warriors, and travelers whose caravans linked the continents. Yet amid the wealth of trade and power, something had been lost. The pure worship that Abraham and Ishmael once proclaimed had faded into shadows. The Kaaba still stood, majestic, unbroken, but its sacred stones had been surrounded by idols. 360 figures of wood and stone now encircled the house of God, each demanding worship that belonged only to the Creator. The people of Makkah honored the memory of Abraham, yet they no longer remembered his God. Sacrifices were made, but faith had been replaced with ritual. The desert was loud, but heaven was silent. Still, prophecy waited. The wind that swept across the dunes still whispered the old promise, that one day, from the line of Ishmael, a voice would rise again. In the year of the elephant, a year marked by miracles and invasion, the world trembled on the edge of change. Armies marched toward Makkah to destroy the Kaaba, but they were struck down by flocks of birds that rained stones from the sky. The house was preserved, because the one who built it through Abraham and Ishmael had decreed its protection. He called the preach, "There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger." He called the people back to the faith of Abraham and Ishmael, to pure monotheism, to prayer, to mercy, to justice. He cleansed the Kaaba of idols, restoring it to the worship of the one who created the heavens and the earth. When he entered the sanctuary, he touched the black stone with reverence, the same stone Ishmael had once set into the foundation. He declared, "This is the house built by my forefather Abraham and my forefather Ishmael." The people who once worshipped idols now stood shoulder to shoulder, bowing to the unseen God. The tribes that warred for centuries became one ummah, one nation united by faith, language, and purpose. The desert that had once been cursed with silence became the cradle of revelation. And through Islam, the voice of Ishmael's covenant roared across continents, carried on the tongues of millions. The story of Ishmael, once buried beneath dust and doubt, now stands as the living root of a global faith. Every year, millions travel to the valley of Baca, the same barren place where Abraham and Ishmael once lifted stones. They circle the Kaaba, raise their hands, and say the same prayer. The children of Ishmael carry the mark of that ancient covenant. The bow of the desert archer has become the crescent of a civilization. The well that once saved Hagar still flows, the Zamzam, quenching pilgrims from every nation. And the word that once echoed in the wilderness, "God hears," still breathes in every call to prayer. Ishmael was never forgotten. He was chosen,